look at how to convert decimals to fractions. So we discussed earlier how when you convert between decimals and fractions, it makes it easier to compare different values. Because again, decimals and fractions are just different representations of the same value. If I told you that 25 cents represents a part of a dollar, and I said how many parts of a dollar does that represent, or what part of a dollar, you would easily tell me that 1/4 of a dollar is 25 cents. So this decimal has a corresponding fraction that represents the same value. The neat thing about converting is that every terminating and repeating decimal can easily be rewritten as a fraction. So before we get to our ordinary decimals, let's look at whole numbers or integers. We already know how to write whole numbers in a fraction form. It's very simple. To write 2 as a fraction, I would write 2 over 1 because 2 is in the ones place, so there's 2 ones. To write a negative 150 as a fraction, I'd write negative 150 over 1 because there are 150 ones. So keep this in mind. This is going to come back that when we look at place value, we can easily turn our decimals into fractions. So you probably don't realize you already know how to convert decimals to fractions because you know how to properly say a decimal. When you read a decimal out loud properly using place value, you say that fraction out loud. So let's try it and see if you can pick up. So how would we properly say the following? So let's look at this decimal. I wouldn't say 0.97, I would say 97 hundredths. All right, think about how you'd say this right here, not 1.6. You would properly say 1 6/10. All right, this last one might be a little tricky to think about, but give it a second. You would properly pronounce this decimal 175 thousandths. So notice we said that place value without even realizing it. So now let's use our notes and apply that understanding. All right, so in your interactive notebook, you should have 2 separate note sheets. And so you want to spread those out on your interactive notebook page so you have room for examples underneath each one. So let's put terminating decimals to fractions on top, leave a little bit of space, and then put repeating decimals to fraction on bottom with a little bit of space. All right, so let's fill these in. Let's look at how to turn terminating decimals into fractions. It's a very simple process. We're going to use the digits behind the decimal as the numerator of your fraction, and we're going to use the place value of the last digit as the denominator of your fraction. Let's label the place value. So the first digit behind the decimal is in the tenths place. So we're going to put a 10 because that'll be our denominator, but don't forget to put your TH so you know it's the tenths place. The second digit after the decimal is the hundredths place. And the third is the thousandths place. You can keep going to the 10 thousandths and the 100 thousandths, but we're going to stop after 3 digits after the decimal. So here's our example. If we want to turn 0.65 into a fraction, first we can say it, 65 hundredths, but that tells us that the 5, the last digit, ends in the hundredths place. The 100 becomes our denominator. And the digits after the decimal are 65, that becomes our numerator. And you can check yourself, 65 hundredths as a fraction is less than 1 whole. Also, 65 hundredths as a decimal is less than 1 whole. So we know we did the conversion correctly. So let's practice a few. We have 2.87 or 2 87 hundredths. Just like when we convert fractions to decimals, if you have a whole number in your fraction, you're going to have a whole number in your decimal. So we're going to carry our 2 over, so that means we're going to have a mixed number as our fraction, greater than 1. So 2 carries over, and our 87 are the digits behind the decimal, that becomes our numerator. The 7 is the last digit, and it's in the hundredths place, so 100 becomes our denominator. All right, let's try another example. 0.6. All right, 6 is the digit behind the decimal, becomes our numerator. It is in the tenths place, that becomes our denominator. So the proper way to say that would be 6/10. Now you can simplify these fractions and we'll look at that later, but first we're just going to practice writing them. All right, lastly, 0.375. Think about how you might say that and predict the fraction in your head. All right, 375 would be our numerator, it's behind the decimal. And if I were to say this decimal correctly, It would be 375 thousandths because it ends in the thousandths place. So our denominator is 1,000. So take a second, write those examples down. Make sure you have your notes on terminating decimals to fractions complete. We're about to move on to repeating decimals. All right. Let's look at how to turn repeating decimals to fractions. Very same process, one minor detail is different. So we're going to again use the digits behind the decimal as our numerator, but here's the catch. If we have a repeating bar, meaning a repeating decimal, then we're not going to use the place value, we're going to use the place value minus 1 as the denominator. And simply put, instead of the tenths place, we're not going to use a 10 as our denominator, we're going to use a 9. For the hundredths place, we're not going to use a 100, we're going to use a 99. And same for the thousandths, think about what you might put there, 999. And again, the place value minus 1 will be the denominator if you're trying to turn a repeating decimal into a fraction. So let's look at our example. Notice instead of 65 hundredths, where it's terminated, we have 65 hundredths with a repeating bar, meaning our decimal is going to repeat. We must show that in our fraction. All right, so 65 is still our numerator, but our 5 ended in the hundredths place, but it's repeating, so instead of 100, we're going to use 99. All right, underneath those notes, we are going to write a few examples, practice this concept. So again, we're going to carry any whole numbers over. Those become the beginning of, or the whole number in our fraction. So 87 is behind the decimal. It's going to be our numerator. Again, I'm not going to put a 100. It ends in the hundredths place, but it's repeating, so we're going to use 99 as our denominator. All right, let's try 0.6 repeating. So 6 is the digit behind the decimal. That's our numerator. And it's in the tenths place, so we're not going to use 10, but we're going to use 9. All right. And 0.375 repeating, or 375 thousandths repeating, we're going to put 375 as our numerator. And instead of 1,000, we're going to use 999. All right, if you need to pause the video and write down these examples, you can do so now. We're going to do a few practice problems before we finish our lesson. All right, now it's your turn to practice converting decimals to fractions. There are 3 example problems. Once you get these decimals written down, pause the video and try to convert them to fractions using your notes. Then play this video to see if you got them correct. So let's see if you got them correct. All right, we want to turn this decimal into a fraction. I hope you started by carrying over your whole number, because 3 holes in a decimal will create a fraction with 3 holes. And then your fraction part, the numerator should have been 4, and it's in the tenths place, so we should have created 3 4/10. All right, on the next decimal, we know that our numerator will be 81, but our denominator will not be 100. It is a repeating decimal, so instead of 100, we're going to use 99. And lastly, our last decimal, number 3, is going to have a big numerator. Don't let that numerator fool you. It is a terminating decimal. It does not repeat, so we will use the last digit's place value of 1,000. And this concludes the lesson on how to convert decimals to fractions using place value.